The Latrax Teton is the cheapest Traxxas you can buy, but in 2025, is it still worth it? Let's find out. When this little guy was first introduced in 2015, the mini RC landscape was very different, and the market wasn't flooded with millions of Amazon special minis. However, these days the market is flooded with Amazon special minis, and I grabbed this one as a point of modern comparison. This is the Mu 4 something something, and it's on a platform we haven't looked at in a while, so it should be interesting to see how this modern platform compares to something that was designed and made over a decade ago. And since you guys have been so awesome about subscribing, liking, and commenting on my videos, I'm gonna give one of these away in this video and let you pick which one you want. This little Teton is an adorable mini monster truck, and whereas it says Latrax all over it, even on the ESC and on places like this included nickel metal hydride battery, if you look closely, you can tell this is definitely a Traxxas. The tires on this little truck are very small, even by mini standards. They're actually held on by a hex head machine screw. They have a 12mm hex, so you do have the option of running different tires on this truck, but these tires are small and light. They don't even have foams in them, and they're small and light for a reason, which we'll be looking at in a second. As you can see, these are 2.7 inches in diameter and 1.4 inches wide. Again, there's no foams in them, and they've got a decent tread pattern. Underneath there is what appears to be a fairly standard 12mm hex, but pulling it off, it doesn't mount like a standard 12mm hex, so you have to get specific upgrades, though there are upgrades available. As a matter of fact, there are upgrades available for pretty much this entire car. One popular upgrade is a brushless power system, which you know we're going to be doing later in the video. I gotta say, guys, taking a look at this thing really brings me back. I actually took a break from RC for a few years, and this little guy was the first car I bought as I was getting back into it again. With those wheels off, you can see we're left with a pretty simple platform. This thing is mostly made out of plastic, including some places you might not expect. It uses these fairly tall shock towers for the monster truck version, and a standard clip system. That system holds on this basic body. There are no skid plates or any protection anywhere on it, and while this body is Lexan, it's fairly thin Lexan, though with the weight of the car, that's probably not going to be a problem. This little truck is using all Phillips head self-tappers. As far as I know, this is the only Traxxas currently made that uses these, though quite a few of their products used them way back in the day. Pulling this little electronics box off here, you'll see something that looks kind of familiar. And that's this receiver box that isn't really a receiver box at all. As you can see, the brand new Traxxas Mini XRT uses a very similar setup, where instead of having an enclosure in the bottom of the box, they're relying on a piece of foam to seal between the receiver itself and the cover. And even though the Traxxas manual for this truck does clearly state that it's highly water resistant, I would consider this particular setup to be splash resistant at best, and I definitely would not submerge this. This Latrax branded receiver is a standard Traxxas TQ unit. To go along with that receiver, we get a very familiar transmitter. This is the Traxxas TQ, Latrax branded. And whereas this transmitter doesn't have a lot of features, I will say that it is better than most of the transmitters you're going to get with the cheap Amazon special options. These transmitters have come a long way over the last several years, but the Traxxas transmitter is better made and it feels higher quality. The thing you're not going to have to worry about with the Traxxas transmitter and receiver is latency. They do a really good job with responsiveness and range. Powering that receiver is this little 1200 milliamp hour nickel metal hydride pack. Those of you that haven't been in RC for very long might not even know what nickel metal hydride is, as we're all used to lipos these days. Nickel metal hydride came in after the first rechargeable batteries we had in the hobby, which were nickel cadmium. Both NiCad batteries and nickel metal hydride batteries were quite a bit safer than lithium batteries, as they didn't really tend to blow up if they got abused, but they were heavy and they weren't very energy dense. As you can see, this Traxxas pack weighs 5 ounces, and even though this FMS pack has twice as much energy in it, it only weighs an ounce more. That's why we usually see lipos these days instead of nickel metal hydride, but that's what comes with this, so that's what we're going to be starting out with. This little ESC is similar to the XL 2.5 ESCs we see in the brushed 1/16 Traxxas e-Revo based cars, though it's missing the metal heatsink, so it's probably not as powerful, and that's powering this adorable little brushed motor. In order to take a closer look at how this motor drives the rest of the truck, we've got to take this top plate off. Unfortunately, it wraps all the way around behind this rear shock tower, so this all has to come off as well. These shocks just pop off the balls. And these shocks are about as basic as you can get. They do have nice little spring perches here, but everything on them is plastic. Interestingly, for a Mini that's 10 years old, these are fluid filled, which is really nice to see, as most Minis from this time didn't have fluid in the shocks, though these shocks are fairly weak. Traxxas does offer GTR upgrades that are much, much nicer. Though compared to the shocks on even the most basic Amazon special these days, they look pretty anemic. As you can see, this MEW4 has pretty thick shafts, metal caps on top and bottom, and a threaded body. Though these cheap shocks do tend to leak, and I've never really had a problem with leaking on these Latrax shocks. This MEW4 also uses Phillips self-tappers, though there are a lot of cars in this price range that use machine screws these days, so you do have that option if you want it. Now, pulling this other shock off of here, as well as this front bumper. This is a fairly basic front bumper, but it should hold up okay. Annoyingly, a couple of these screws are buried down in the bumper, and you can't get to them with a regular screwdriver. Traxxas doesn't include a screwdriver with this kit, so that's something you're going to have to buy separately if you want to work on this, and a regular size bit just isn't going to fit in there. However, with those out, we can get this bumper out of the way and pull off this shock tower. I do like this cool blue color. By the way, one nice thing about this design is most of the screws are the same length, which is something Arrma has done with their Groms and makes working on these trucks a lot easier. By the way, yes, I am aware that the Groms are another competitor to these Latrax cars. I'll explain why I'm not using one of these as the direct comparison at the end of the video. Now, with all that removed, we can peel this top electronics plate off of here. This also acts as a center spine, very similar to how the Groms are. We do have a metal center drive shaft. This is aluminum or stainless steel, I'm not sure which one. And with one more screw removed, we can go ahead and pull the motor out of here. This is a simple brushed motor. This motor mount design does look pretty familiar to the Groms as well. And then as you can see, we've got a plastic spur gear here with no slipper clutch. One thing I have to say I'm surprised about so far, which I really shouldn't be, is that this kit feels very high quality. Cars like this MEW4 offer a lot out of the box, but they also sometimes feel pretty rough around the edges. Just like the Arrma Groms, this little Teton feels like a good quality piece of kit. Don't worry though, even though things seem cool and normal so far, they're about to get weird. Because underneath this bulkhead is a differential that's pretty unique to these little Latrax cars. As you can see, there's no separate differential housing. Classically, these differentials have been a major weak point of this platform, but I'm going to show you a simple upgrade that makes them quite a bit stronger. And even though these are weird, you do get steel ring and pinion gears. Though the spider gears, side gears, and output cups are made from zinc, which makes them significantly weaker than if they were made out of steel. But riding on those zinc output cups are bearings, and even though they are shielded, we do have bearings throughout this car. This front and lower bulkhead is all part of the same chassis, so if you break anything on this, you're replacing the whole chassis. And speaking of breaking things, let me show you what the weak point's going to be when we upgrade to brushless. That's going to be these fully plastic universal joints. They do have metal pins for the output cups, but all the rest of this is plastic, including the joint in the middle here. And this is a pretty common failure point when you go up to brushless. Of course, upgrades are available for this. One nice touch on this kingpin style steering in the front are these shoulder bolts. They're not as good as having steel inserts, but they do work better than just having screws. And for suspension, you've got some pretty standard arms. These are reasonably durable, though they're on fairly tiny hinge pins, which do tend to get bent, especially once you go to higher power and start getting some big air on these cars. Now, in contrast, this similarly priced MEW4 feels a lot more modern. Even though its body is similarly sized, it has skid plates on the top and on the rear. While fairly small, this does have a brushless motor and ESC, and those are being powered by a lithium-ion battery. This is 2S 1500 milliamp hour, and in the box, you even get a second one. Though I will say I definitely trust this UL-rated Traxxas wall charger a lot more than this generic USB LiPo charger. These things do technically work, but they're not very high quality. And unlike with the Traxxas nickel metal hydride battery, if you overcharge a LiPo, you could blow it up. That's why I always recommend upgrading your charger pretty much right away when you get one of these things. Something like this iMARS D300 from Genzace is a fantastic option. It gives you a screen so you can see what's going on, and has a bunch of safety protection. Of course, this costs as much as this, but there are cheaper options out there that still give you more features than one of these little USB guys. By the way, let me know if you'd like to see one of these nice chargers in my big giveaway that we're going to do when we hit 50,000 subscribers, and make sure you get subscribed to get us to that point. Beyond the batteries and power system, there are a lot of things that make this car feel more modern, including foam-filled tires that attach with regular nuts, nice big beefy steel CVDs, an all-steel drivetrain, lights on the front, which you may or may not care about, and a somewhat more modern chassis design, though this isn't really that much easier to work on, if any easier to work on, than the Latrax platform. But like I said, a lot of this is going to feel more modern. Though to be fair, most of these Amazon special cars are only based off a couple of different chassis. There's this one, and then there's the one that most of the Hypergo cars are based off of. So a lot of what you get is going to look the same. As you can see, we've got 12mm hexes here. These are standard 12mm hexes, so you can upgrade them. The way the battery compartment's designed is quite a bit nicer than on the Latrax because this strap lets you have taller batteries. Like the Latrax, this does have standard body posts in the front front and rear, so if you're a fan of those, you get them here as well. Some Amazon special cars have moved to clipless bodies, but none of them have been great in my experience. On the front end here, you do get quite a bit more adjustability than you get on something like the Teton. Obviously, as you can see, we've got adjustable turnbuckles here, and then the previously mentioned threaded shocks. This does also use Kingpin style suspension, though the design is a bit different as it uses a pivot ball for both steering and suspension simultaneously. Powering this thing is a tiny little brushless motor and a 2-in-1 receiver and ESC. A lot of people are okay with these 2-in-1s, but some people don't like them. And especially on something like this, if you're going to be upgrading, there's not a great place to put a separate receiver, so that is a disadvantage to these. One place this does have an advantage is with metal A blocks and D blocks. The reason a lot of cars will have metal in the front and rear, but not in these center blocks, is because if you're going to take a hit with a car, it's probably going to be coming from the front end or from the rear end, and that puts most of the stress on this area. So this area can afford to be a little bit weaker. Of course, on the Latrax, all of this is plastic. And whereas I'm not going to take it apart, we do have standard front and rear differentials in here, which again, I think is an advantage over the strange differentials on the Teton. Speaking of which, let me get all this put together and let's see what this little guy is capable of. All right, we got a fully charged nickel metal hydride battery in this thing, and let's see what it can do. It's actually not that slow. It's a little bit faster than I was expecting it to be, and it is fairly peppy and feels relatively stable. This thing's kind of fun. All right, let's see what kind of speed we got out of it. 17 miles an hour, that's actually faster than I was expecting it to be. Now, as far as bashing the Teton is concerned, something like this is gonna be at home, on a driveway, in a road, jumping on a little ramp like this, and generally on fairly smooth surfaces. These kinds of surfaces will get you the most speed out of it and the most enjoyment. As you can see, it does jump well. The oil-filled shocks really aren't too bad, and it is tuned up pretty reasonably. Actually, that does feel pretty nice. This little ramp is a lot of fun, and I generally use it for these small cars, and you can see why. I got a little flip over there. But overall, for bashing in a really small area and just having fun, especially with little kids and stuff like that, this feels pretty good. But let's see how it handles something a little rougher. Out here on these relatively short weeds and leaves, it's not too bad, although it does get caught up on branches pretty easily. Overall though, this actually is handling better than I thought it was going to, and it's got a decent little amount of pep for what it is. Obviously, it's going to have a lot more pep when we switch it over to brushless, but it is able to power through getting stuck on sticks, and this thing is definitely more capable than I was expecting it to be. Let's try something a little bit taller here. We've got some fairly tall grass over here, and it's actually making its way through that as well. It's not super thrilled about it, but it's not getting stuck off the little ramp. Yeah, there you go. This grass is quite a bit taller than I would ever recommend for a car like this, as it's putting a lot of strain on the powertrain, and that brushed motor probably isn't going to last a really long time, but it is capable of doing it. It did get stuck right there, but in general, it is performing better on this wet grass than I thought it was going to, and it handles little jumps pretty well. How about a bigger jump? Yeah, it doesn't really have the power for that. Now moving over to the MEW4 Amazon Special, obviously this thing's gonna be faster because it has a 2S LiPo and a brushless power system, and it is faster, but it's also a lot less controllable. This thing has that same classic hesitation latency in the transmitter and receiver, and it makes it kind of difficult to keep hold of, especially at higher speed. I'm trying to keep it straight right now, and it keeps darting left and right, and that's because it's not really responding to my commands. But let's get a full speed pass out of it, full throttle, and let's see what we got. Bringing it in. 24 miles an hour, yep, that's quite a bit faster. Let's see how it handles off-road though. This thing definitely has a lot more power. It's willing to do wheelies on command. However, it isn't really that much more controllable just because of the weird controls. It has this strange latency where sometimes it does exactly what you want and sometimes it doesn't. That lack of predictability makes it kind of a handful and kind of makes it not as much fun as the Teton was out here. Obviously, it's gonna be able to handle taller grass better. As you can see, it goes out here without any trouble whatsoever, and we can probably get some good jumps out of it, even through this tall grass. Okay, that might have been a little ambitious. Let's see if we can get it off the big ramp though. Yeah, it jumps off the big ramp okay, not perfectly. Again, the hard to control nature of it because of that latency does make it a little bit difficult to handle, especially given the fact that it has a decent amount of power. I personally think the Teton was more fun overall. As you can see, this thing definitely does better in tall grass, which means it's going to be more versatile on paper, but these little cars are going to be driven by little kids for the most part, and being able to control the thing you're driving is probably more important than the versatility on paper and how much power it has. This thing is fun, but again, not quite as easy to control as that Teton. Now let's go put some more power on that Teton and see what happens. I don't know if I'm experiencing some sort of nostalgia bias, but I like this truck more than I thought I was going to. If you're also experiencing nostalgia bias and you want to win this truck first, make sure you're subscribed and you like the video. If you're not experiencing nostalgia bias and you want to win the MEW4, again, subscribe and like the video, and then let me know down in the comments how you got into this hobby. Not only will that enter you in for a chance to win either one of these that you want, but I think it'll be really fun for us to share our intro to RC stories with each other. One last thing, make sure you hit that bell to get notified of future videos and posts, because I always announce the winners in a community post, and if you haven't hit that bell, you might not know you won. I do think this stock brush power system is pretty reasonable for this car, but we don't really like reasonable on this channel, so let's see if we can break it. We've got an adorable little brushless motor here, and this little Hobby Park ESC. I generally recommend running higher end ESCs such as Hobbywing, as these tend to not be that reliable, but let's try this one out. Everything we took off earlier has to come back off, and we also have to take the rear end apart because we've got to do a little bit of modification to this so it will even handle brushless. So I will say, even though this thing has more screws than some of the competition, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, especially if you have power tools, it's really not that hard to take apart. And again, that Traxxas quality is here. And whereas I'm not a huge fan of self-tappers in general, if you're using hand tools to take these out, the self-tappers are actually an advantage. The coarser thread means they have fewer threads, which means it takes fewer turns to get them in and out. Interestingly, in my research, I found that these coarser threads could actually be stronger in plastic, though it depends on a bunch of different variables. But I found it really curious that machine screws in plastic weren't the home run I was expecting them to be. And it is possible that manufacturers all went to machine screws over the most recent years out of a perceived advantage rather than an actual advantage. Of course, giving people what they expect is really important, and these days self-tappers are seen as lower quality. The new motor should be directly compatible, so we can take this teeny tiny pinion off of here, add a little bit of thread locker, and then install it on our tiny little brushless motor. With little grub screws like this, it's always a balancing act between getting it tight enough not to fall off and not stripping it out. Again, especially on these small hexes, that's why good tools are really important. Here's an interesting design flaw I just found. Traxxas added this plate at some point to help with setting mesh, but they didn't make this screw any longer, and as you can see, it was barely even touching the motor, which means these motors are only held in with one screw. I personally like to set my mesh manually, so we're going to solve the problem by just taking the plate out. Before we finish putting this together and take it for a rip, there's one more thing we need to address, and that's the differentials. Out of the box, there's quite a bit of play in the front and rear diffs, and if you don't address that when you go to brushless power, you're probably going to destroy them basically immediately. Fortunately, fixing it isn't too difficult. I'm pretty sure at this point there are enough different upgrades for this platform that you could make an entire car out of nothing but upgrades. But this upgrade is pretty simple. Basically, all we want to do is squeeze these differential gears together a little bit more. By default, they have a tiny bit of play in them, and that extra play can lead to them breaking under power. To do that, we're just going to use these M8x12 shims. I got this variety pack on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. I'm just going to start with a single 0.2 millimeter thick shim, put it on this side of the bearing on the ring gear side, and then we're going to pop it in and see what it feels like. That actually feels just about perfect, but depending on your manufacturing tolerances, you may need to add more shims on this side or this side, thicker thins or thinner shims. Just get it to where it feels right with just a tiny bit of play, but not too much. Now let me get all this mess put back together. And the last thing we need to do is install the ESC. Fortunately, because this has a separate ESC and receiver, we don't also have to replace our receiver and transmitter. This is just held on with double-side tape. And with the old adhesive removed, we're just going to stick down a piece of VHB and drop our new ESC on. That's pretty much it. I'm just going to get this wired up, and let's go see how much faster it is. All right, we got a 2S LiPo in here, and before I die of heat stroke, let's see what this thing can do. Well, that was only about quarter throttle, so we've definitely got more pep. Full throttle. Yeah, she's quicker. She stops on a dime now. Another full throttle pass. Not bad and pretty stable. The brakes are very sensitive though. Let's give her one more pass. Yeah, those brakes are super sensitive. That's just that ESC and not really a fault of the truck. Like I said, I always recommend getting something like Hobbywing or Castle, but I wanted to see what this cheap ESC could do. And we've also got a cheap battery in here. All right, let's see what we got. All right, 24 miles an hour, just like we got on the Amazon special. That's definitely more pep. Will that extra pep let us do wheelies? Oh yeah, we can definitely do wheelies on this now. Of course, we do still have those plastic drive shafts, so we're gonna have to be careful with those. but it'll definitely pull a wheelie now. No problem whatsoever. Yeah, this feels really good. How's it jump? Ah, missed the ramp on that one. Let's try that again. This ramp's pretty small. Trying to hit it from the side isn't the easiest thing in the world. There we go. Yeah, it jumps just fine. I wonder if we can get a backflip out of it off this ramp. No, it doesn't quite have the wheel speed or weight for a backflip, but that's okay. It also is a little bit off on the steering. It keeps trying to pull to the right, even though I've got the steering all the way to the left. That would be an easy adjustment that I just didn't do. But overall, this thing does feel pretty good, and it's very stable too. It's pretty predictable when it wants to roll over, and it handles very decently. It definitely likes this extra power. I wish it came out of the box brushless. I'd love to see Traxxas do a brushless upgrade on one of these, and maybe upgrade the platform as well, because as a basic platform, this really isn't bad. Yeah, it jumps good, and it looks really cool doing it. This thing's fun. I like the pink too. One more jump. Oh, off to the side on that one. So far, the plastic drive shafts are holding up. Let's go full throttle. Yeah, it does like doing little wheelies. This thing's cool. All right, one more jump. Nice. Well guys, this video has not turned out how I expected it to. I was planning to get this, take it apart, take it out and bash it, have a laugh with it, and then tell you should just buy a Grom or one of these Amazon specials. But that's not how I feel, and again, maybe it's my nostalgia. Let me know down in the comments if you have nostalgia for this platform, but I think it's okay. It's definitely not the fastest thing in the world. 17 miles an hour out of the box isn't gonna set the world on fire. It's not the easiest to work on. It's not the most modern platform, but it does handle pretty well. It's relatively easy to work on. Having a separate receiver means it's pretty easy to upgrade. Parts and upgrades for it are cheap and plentiful. And at 130 bucks, it's not even that expensive. Now, the reason I didn't just directly compare it to a Granite Grom is I was expecting a Granite Grom to just absolutely curb stomp this thing. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure that's the case. This has a separate receiver, is about 20 bucks cheaper, is well built, and looks pretty cool. Don't get me wrong, even at 20 bucks more expensive, I think a Granite Grom in most respects is a better car. But if you like Traxxas and you want to try a little car, this isn't a terrible alternative. I know that doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement, but in contrast to what I was expecting to say, it really is. Now, if you want to win this car or win this car, the choice will be yours. Make sure you do that thing we talked about earlier and then go watch one of these videos.